first of all, can I ask everybody who's not actually presenting to please turn their computer or their audio onto mute? That would be great to get rid of the background noise. So hello and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining the call today about Yewno, to see a demo and to hear from Liz Chase at Stonehill College about how it can help with information literacy. Just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and during this webinar you can email in or chat questions at any point, and there'll also be an opportunity for questions at the end. So Yewno Discover is an artificial intelligence-based discovery service, and on this webinar we're going to cover first of all an overview of how Yewno Discover works and all its functionality. We're going to give some examples of how it can be used in teaching and instruction classes, some student use cases, and how Yewno Discover can overcome some of the challenges with search today. First of all, I'd like to introduce Liz. Liz Chase joined Stonehill College as the Head of Collections, Assessment and User Engagement in 2013. She oversees print and electronic acquisitions. She directs the library's assessment efforts, recently completed a project to redesign and publicize an information skills curriculum based on the ACRL frameworks, and she teaches courses on Irish literature and history. Prior to arriving at Stonehill, Liz was the coordinator for research services at the Rose Manuscript, Archives and Rare Book Library at Emory University, where she completed her PhD. Before we dive into specific use cases in teaching and instruction, I'd like to hand over to Liz to do a demo and show a typical use case that she sees at Stonehill. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and Liz, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so thank you all. Ruth, can you see my screen okay?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, so this is the homepage for the MacPhaidin Library here at Stonehill College, and I'm starting here because I'm just going to show you a couple of ways that students navigate to Yewno and how we've integrated it with our discovery services. We frequently demonstrate the uses of Yewno in our first year courses across disciplines and majors. So to show you just the basics of the functionality, I'm going to talk a little bit about a sociology course that I worked with this fall. Students in their Blackboard eLearn site, which is our LMS, were asked to watch some of the introductory videos that are available from Yewno on the basics of using the interface. And after they watch that basic Yewno Discover tutorial, I replicate that information in a video that shows some specific search topics for their course. So in that video, I introduced to them how to get to Yewno from our homepage. One of the things that we've done is, in addition to searching our catalog, students can search Yewno by coming here to our drop-down menu and choosing that as their search feature from our homepage. We also have Yewno listed in our databases list, and they can navigate to the interface directly from there. So one of the ways that we use this across general courses, and the way that's probably best to demonstrate some of the initial features, is that we talk about this as a way to develop questions and sub-questions. So for the sociology class, I started from a student who was interested in thinking about how technology is changing human relationships. And this helps students to think about the vocabulary that they'll need to use. So I started by asking them to just do a very basic search for technology. When you do a search in the interface, I'm searching within the academic domain. There's also government documents, and you can search across 3 languages. Our students are primarily English speakers. That's the interface we interact with most frequently. Terms will come up here below. And when you click on a term, it's going to expand the concept into a node, into a main concept map here on the right-hand side. You'll then see a definition of your term with the sources for the different versions of that definition. From there, students are able to look at and think about the different terms that have come up and the related concepts, which you can see here by clicking on concepts. They can also see documents related just to the term technology. So if a student has done that search and they're thinking about this, they may start from that idea of just searching for technology and realize that that's really not targeted enough, and that's one of the things we use this to show them. So they can clear their search, do a more targeted search for social media, and then start to look at some of the additional terminology that comes up. If they want to add more terms, and more concepts to their node, they can expand the concept. If they want to narrow it down, they can use the slide bar here to narrow their concept down. So one of the things that we've done is, in talking about this, we've expanded a second node to show students how they can begin to see and visualize the links between concepts. So you'll see now I get a definition of online community and concepts links to that. If I click on this bar that's linking the two terms, then I'll get an examination of concepts that link those two terms and documents that link those two terms. So I've now been able to look at a linking concept, an initial concept, and move on from there. So from here, we might ask students to begin to think about, how is social media specifically changing how we think about community? And you'll see here that one of the things we get to when we think about the connections between these terms is internet activism, and I'll come back to that example a little bit later. But that's just a basic overview of some of the core functionality and how we might start to show students this product.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Liz. So going back to April 2016, can you tell me what you thought when you first saw the Yewno Discover product at Stonehill, and how you thought it might influence the knowledge discovery landscape?
Certainly. So one of the opportunities that was particularly beneficial to us of the timing of the interface and thinking about this product is that we started using it when we were working to address the framework, the ACRL frameworks for information literacy. We were in the midst of doing a detailed revision of our library skills curriculum. So two of the main benefits that I saw initially, one I've sort of already touched on in just showing the interface generally, is that I could see immediate benefits for our population of first-year students who are trying to learn better search term construction. For them, thinking about these terms in a visual, connected way, and being able to see how other scholars and other disciplines might think of that terminology in ways that would differ from how they've initially conceptualized it was very, very beneficial. It provided a very visual, accessible interface for walking students through that process. And then at the other end of our general education program, we have students who are in capstones. They're in thesis projects or hands-on internships who are using Yewno as a way to find gaps in the current research. So as a way to identify the connections that they want to make that aren't already represented when you do a semantic search of the literature that is existing and that's out there. So they can think about the connections they want to contribute to new knowledge. Again, we're also moving in changing our information skills curriculum towards a consultation model. Our reference desk numbers have dropped as they have at many academic institutions, while our one-on-one research consultations have taken off exponentially. We've seen a 135% increase over the past year in those consultations. So when we're showing students resources and we're working closely with them and with their faculty members, we've been able to see their bibliographies, and we realize that they've only used the resources that we've given them, or they've only really done an initial sort of brief dive into what they have access to. And Yewno is letting us put the students kind of back in the driver's seat by helping show them how to use search terms, but not handing them really specific results. What we're more teaching them is how to go through that research process, as you can see, as we start to think about those nodes and those concept maps, as opposed to going straight into the databases and immediately giving them PDFs that they're going to walk away with and not come back to us to kind of talk through that research process.
Thank you very much, Liz. Could you talk us through a couple of real-life examples of how you currently use Yewno in teaching and instruction classes?
Certainly. So I'll come back to the Sociology 101 course in a moment, but in addition to that course where we've combined video tutorials that are available from Yewno with course-specific videos that I've created, I've also used Yewno during in-person instruction sessions, in particular when working with students in an introductory English course who are doing a project on protest music in the United States. They're given a number of different figures that they can research. And so often for those students, they're starting with a search on a figure like Bob Dylan. And when we explore this as a starting concept, and I can zoom out here a little bit, they start to see some of the ways that Dylan has been talked about and considered within the literature. They see some of the people that he's connected to, some of his major works, but we also see information on protest music, protest songs in the United States. So I show the students that they can add a second term. And generate a relationship between these concepts, as I showed earlier. And then they can look at the available documents to begin to think about what they're interested in that connection, and thinking about protest music and Bob Dylan. Students at this level are conducting fairly basic initial research into what they might be interested in. But then if they see something that's of interest to them, they can click on this and they can see a relevant snippet from the article. They can see that it came from an academic journal, and they can click on the document source and go to the vendor's site. If it's a source that we don't have access to, one of the things that we also worked with Yewno on when the product was in beta was being able to actually click on a link that would take a student to our interlibrary loan interface so that they can log in. It pulls in all of the relevant information, and they can immediately submit a request to get an article delivered directly to them. That's been really useful for us, because one of the things that's beneficial for us as a small liberal arts college is that Yewno allows students to discover a really vast body of material beyond what we have immediate full text access to here on campus. We are a heavy borrower institution with ILL. It's a really productive way for our students to get access to material. And so being able to link into that directly in the Yewno interface is very important for our students. So again, for us, the emphasis here is on exploration, is on thinking about what it is that students at the early first year level might be thinking about for connections between terms, for thinking about how they're going to explore their topic, how they're going to refine and really articulate what it is they're interested in. In other courses, such as that sociology course, they might be asked to explore further. And so as they do that, we want them to use Yewno to find links both between materials that we have access to and the much broader range of academic books and journal articles that have been ingested into the database. So we instruct them on how to move from conducting exploratory searches into following that trail through to documents that they might get from our databases or requests from interlibrary loan. So if we return to that social media search, one of the next steps I would ask them to do is to actually go through and slide that toolbar in and out, look at the terms that are coming up, and start to generate a list of terms that they're interested in and write down those that seem most useful. So that might be things like virtual community, media activism, Slacktivism, networked advocacy, e-democracy, etc. And so if I add a term here for internet activism, and again, look at the documents that come up when I connect those terms. One of the nice things about Yewno is that there's a large body of book material listed in here, as well as journal articles. And so if a student was interested in a book, again, I would show them how to walk through the ILL process to request that book. Then I might also show them how to take out one term and add in another. So if they wanted to say, okay, let's take a look not just at internet activism, but at that concept of Slacktivism. Again, I can have them look at the linking documents. And then I usually use this as an opportunity to explain to students how to use our eJournals portal. So this comes from the European Journal of Social Psychology, and we have the ability here to conduct a search and show where we have full text access to that journal within our library databases. So students are able to get to that in Academic Search Complete. So when we start to work with students who are doing a bit more deep dive into their research, we also use Yewno as a way to then connect them into the interfaces where we have full text access, as well as showing them how to use our interlibrary loan.
Thanks, Liz. Could you tell us a little bit about how some of the students have responded to the tool?
Absolutely. So one of the things that's been really interesting to me, Ruth shared my very long title. I wear a number of hats here in the library, and one of those hats is for assessment. I am in charge of the overall assessment program for the MacPhaidin Library, and that involves designing and administering our annual surveys. And one of the things that we've had in our survey for a number of years now is an open-ended question where we ask students to identify the 3 most important resources that they use in their research. And we use that question in order to determine how aware students are of library resources, whether or not they're listing Google. We are a campus that is an extremely heavy user of JSTOR. We actually had to double check at one point that we did not have an issue going on with someone scraping our JSTOR account for articles because of how high our usage was for our size. We were okay, thankfully. But what's been interesting to me is to see that a number of our students are identifying Yewno in that open-ended question already within the first couple of years of having this new product. So there's, I think, been a deep level of adoption across the campus by faculty and by students, and so that's been beneficial to see. They like the browsability of it, and they like the aesthetics of it. So you're able to, if I had done a number of different searches here, you'd be able to see the layers of your search. You can also choose between selection modes to generate connections between concepts that we hadn't already looked at before. You can save or export your knowledge map by taking a snapshot of it. And they like the fact that you can look through their research journey. So if you look here, it shows all of the actions that I've taken in my recent searches. I can either decide that I'm not interested in saving those and delete those, or I can export that information. I have the ability to create an account and log in and take notes. And so all of these things are extremely useful for our students as they're doing their research and thinking about what it is they might want to use Yewno for. And they overall, the biggest piece of feedback that we've probably heard is that they really appreciate the guidance in crafting their keywords and thinking through their topics. The way that it's representing concepts and nodes in this graphic format where they're able to see the linkages between concepts is very productive for them as researchers.
Thanks very much, Liz. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see Yewno help with some of the challenges that students experience with traditional search today, and what changes do you see in how students look for and navigate information?
Certainly. So I find, as I'm sure many do, that students are being asked to have much greater facility with the wide range of ways that information can be accessed, both in terms of materials that they have access to through the library and by engaging with collections held by other institutions. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits for us in particular as a small liberal arts college of having access to Yewno is that we're able to ask students to do that work of engaging with a much broader network of information. But at the same time, they're not out on Google doing these searches. They're in a scholarly network of material that's been selected and ingested into Yewno, so that we're starting from a really core body of material that is valuable, well-vetted academic and government document material for them to work from. There's a world of what we're able to subscribe to as a small liberal arts college, and then there's the network of what's contained in Yewno that goes well beyond those subscriptions. So they're able to tap into that search that's more reliable and yet broader than what we have subscription access to. And that helps them to really begin to understand the idea of a scholarly network. We find that our students come in with assumptions about starting with the internet, that they can always find what they need through publicly available websites. And many of our students know about Google Scholar, but they don't understand that we have materials that they may hit a paywall for. So we've started doing instruction with our first years where we explicitly talk about what to do when they hit a paywall, when they've done a search publicly. This is also often exacerbated by the fact that many of our students go straight into JSTOR from Google Scholar, and they tend to select preferred resources and stick to them. So once they've determined that they can use JSTOR productively in one course, they have a strong tendency to gravitate back to that. and they may or may not fully understand what they can get to from the library catalog. So we've found that introducing them to individual databases isn't enough. We want to teach them how to navigate the kind of overwhelming stream of information that they're accessing. And we want them to do more hands-on activities in our instruction sessions. And for all of those various components of how student research is changing, we've been able to really productively incorporate, into our instruction sessions to help them see how to really think through that research process. So for instance, I might have a student who is a first year in a literature class who's never had to do research into literary theory before and is working on the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, if I can type. And they might come in and say to me, okay, I have to do research and I want to talk about race in American history in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we say, okay, let's think about how we can narrow that down a bit. And we use Yewno to do that, to show them options and connections in terms of how they can think about what topics are covered, how to begin to really dive down into the network of information available. So we look at terms connecting Uncle Tom's Cabins to things like minstrel shows as a way of getting them to start thinking about more specific terminology around race in 19th century America and how it's deployed in the novel as a starting point for their research. And it's been really productive for them to be able to visualize that through the interface.
Thanks, Liz. Prior to Stonehill, you were at a large research university. Based on your experience so far at Stonehill, what do you think the benefits of a system like Yewno are for a small liberal arts campus? And can you talk a little bit about the level of student engagement you've seen?
Certainly. As I mentioned, our students tend to have preferred resources that they begin with and that they then want to stick to. And so at a small liberal arts college, it's very frequent that this is in part because they want to be able to get to full text material. They are doing research sometimes, as we know, at the last minute. And what we're trying to do is encourage them to really think about situationally about their research. Are they going to need materials that we may not have access to? Do they need to build in time to request things through interlibrary loan? And so being able to show them sort of the broad range of what's going to be available to them if they do that planning is very useful. And doing that through Yewno has been very productive for our students because they're able, again, to see those scholarly resources. So, for instance, if I had a class where students were doing research on ornithology for a capstone project, I can create a search that shows that process, that shows connections amongst various different disciplines such as ornithology and behavioral ecology, and begin to think about what it is that my students are going to need to access. One of the publishers that Yewno has ingested is journals from Wiley. We have good holdings from Wiley, but certainly not the vast range of what they have available. And so students in the sciences are then able to get a much better understanding of what the relevant journals are in that field, what they might need to request through interlibrary loan, and really see the vast scholarly network around these topics that's available to them. Having the students do these test searches and expand different nodes to see what connections they can make is really one of the ways that we've asked them to think more broadly about research at a small liberal arts campus. So in contrast to a research university, I think Emory has over a couple hundred subscription databases that they have access to. We have a much smaller number here. And so students very often will say, well, I can't get to anything on my topic that's relevant. And because you have such a wide range of material that they can see here and that they can begin to think about, very often we find that it's not that there's nothing we have full text access to, it's that they haven't really figured out yet how to deploy the terminology that we would find in the databases for searching that. They're used to doing natural language Google searches. And so this enables us to help them think through how to shift that process of searching, how to search more accurately in the databases and within Yewno itself. So again, for our students, that's been a really useful and productive way for them to begin to sort of grasp the landscape of what is out there and what they would see if they went to graduate school as students at larger research universities.
Thanks, Liz. Your experience in libraries is entirely front of house in research and instruction. As someone who supervises a group that doesn't have deep systems or technical expertise, what was your experience in preparing to teach Yewno to others, and how much did you have to rely on your systems librarian?
Certainly. So for a little bit of context, we are an institution of just under 2,500 students. My team is myself and 4 other reference librarians. We have a systems librarian and a systems assistant, and then we have access services and technical services. So we're a small shop, bigger than some, but still relatively small in the landscape of academic libraries. And what was useful was that we actually relied very little on our systems librarian after the initial launch. She did a lot of the interfacing with Ruth and with the team at Yewno in order to make sure that they had everything they needed about what our holdings were, what we were going to see in the interface when we went live. But we've really experienced no issues in terms of accessibility and being able to access the interface and use it productively. What was interesting to me to see as a department head is that we have librarians in my team, including myself, who really run the gamut when it comes to technical abilities and technical and comfort with new technologies. So one of the things that was fascinating to me is that one of our least kind of self-admittedly least tech-savvy librarians really embraced Yewno, and she works with it frequently with students and faculty because it was easy to use and easy to explain what students were seeing happen as they did these searches. We also were part of Yewno during the beta phase, so we were able to really experiment with the product as it was developing and provide feedback, and that was a really interesting experience. That was not an experience anyone on my team had ever had before in working with a beta product, and so there was a lot of trepidation, but people were really excited to use it, which in some ways was a surprise to me. And now that it's launched, obviously, and been launched for a while, and we've been using the finished product, we've continued to use it, which is good. We've continued to make use of it for a wider and wider range of classes. And we've heard back from students and faculty about how they're using it and the new ways in which they're figuring out how to adapt it into their assignments and their classrooms.
Great, thank you, Liz. So Yewno provides some useful reporting capabilities. How do you use these at Stonehill, and have you incorporated them into your assessments?
So there's a very easy to use dashboard that we have access to see how our community is making use of the interface. And much of this is still in the planning phases, but we are planning to use that to help us identify when students are most active on Yewno, to help us target the types of reference services we're offering at high stress points in the research process. This summer, our building is going to be undergoing some renovation. We're moving towards new models for reference services. We're going from having a circulation desk and a reference desk to having a single shared service point. We're moving towards more one-on-one consultations and having reference librarians on call and implementing new trainings for our student assistants, who will in some ways be the first point of contact to do triage with our patrons to determine what their reference needs are. So as we do that, being able to have good data that tells us what the points of needs are for students based on metrics that we're able to see about their online presence, not just their presence in the building, is really going to be vital. So we know based on other analytical tools that we use, when it is that students are most likely to be present in the building and coming to the desk to ask us questions. But one of the pieces we haven't really been able to see before is when and how are they really active online and doing their research. So we know general usage data about our databases in terms of article downloads, chapter downloads, things like that. But the interface with Yewno really enables us to see when students are not just conducting their searches, but how deeply they're moving through those searches. One of the things that the interface allows us to look at is student levels of engagement. And so that's been helpful to us as we think about how to revise and improve our instruction offerings, how to revise and improve our reference offerings. If we notice that we've provided instruction, but students aren't really showing the levels of engagement we expect, we can follow up with an instructor and offer to create video tutorials that are specific to that class that will show students how to do more with the tools that we've given them. If we see that there are students who are conducting research in a very specific area and that there's a high level of activity at a particular point, but it's not a class that we've done instruction for, because we're a small liberal arts college, it's generally likely that between the 5 reference librarians, one of us will know whose assignment it probably was that sparked all of that activity, and then we can reach out to that faculty member and see if they're interested in having us provide some instruction and some additional assistance to their students. So in addition to just general data keeping that we use as good stewards of our resources, we're thinking about really new and generative ways that we can make use of what we're able to obtain through the dashboard.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm going to move on to a couple of questions that have been sent in. The first one is, how have faculty responded to the use of the tool in classes?
Sure. So the sociology example that I showed at the beginning actually comes from a faculty member who approached us and asked us about whether or not we could demonstrate the product to her students. She had seen it as part of her new faculty orientation, and she was really excited about it because she, as part of her pedagogy, has always talked about this idea of concept mapping and mental mapping and thinking about kind of the broad networks of information that are at play. She teaches courses around race and ethnic studies for the sociology department. And so for her, she found this to be a really useful visual representation of some of the concepts she'd already been talking about with students in her courses. We also have an early modernist faculty member who does a lot of digital humanities work, and she teaches a course on Marlowe's networks, Christopher Marlowe's networks, and she uses it to help her students begin to think about the visual networking of information. How can they map out the networks that they're studying in their course? How can they think about the conceptual maps and tools that are available to them in Yewno as they conduct their research? And then for our faculty who are teaching capstone projects, they've been really interested in playing with the interface and really trying to figure out, okay, how do I find the gaps? How do I help my students understand that there is still new knowledge to be created and that they can participate in that process? A lot of our students tend to be risk averse when it comes to intellectual risk taking. They want to know what they need to do, how to do it well, how to find all the puzzle pieces and put them together. And one of the things that our faculty really try to do in terms of encouraging them where they want them to get to as seniors is to understand that having an original idea, being able to contribute to the research is something that they should feel empowered to do. And so being able to use this in order to find some of the changes in the gaps in the research has been really productive for those faculty, and they've been really excited about it.
Thanks, Liz. Another question that's been emailed in is, how have you made use of the tool in working with online classes?
So I teach an online course during the summers. It's an 8-week course, so there's not a lot of time to do all of the information skills instruction that I'd like to do. But if I use Yewno to help my students think about and formulate their research questions, I've found that that's been really useful within the context of that class. I teach an interdisciplinary studies course that fulfills our moral inquiry requirement. And their final assignment is to design a memorial in response to historical events. And it has to be an event around which there's disagreement about how to remember the event, what's being remembered, etc. And then they have to explain why their design represents an ethical response to that memory. So they have to pull together historical research, theory that we've read, articles that they've located by doing research. It's highly interdisciplinary. So one of the things I found when I first taught the course in person is that the databases the students are going to use are going to vary greatly depending on the topic that they choose and their own disciplinary background. So in this case, for the online course, to help them think through that process, I created a tutorial that asks them to use Yewno to help identify the keywords concepts that are part of their project, and then browse the documents that are accessible through Yewno to see what sorts of ebooks and journal articles are coming up, and using the semantic work that Yewno has done in order to think about the disciplines that those materials are situated in. So that way, by using that in concert with our subject guides and our databases, they're able to determine really what field they're grounding their research in, and how to really use all of that as a productive jumping off point.
Fantastic, thanks Liz. We've had another question that's been emailed in, which is, can you access library-owned material from within Yewno, or do you have to go out of the app to do this?
So that question may be a bit complicated for us personally at the moment, and I may, because we are having issues with our security certificate that are completely unrelated to Yewno. We currently use a product where we're getting a lot of security certificate warnings and sending students into our sites. So Ruth, are you able to answer that question from your broader knowledge of other institutions?
Yeah, no problem. So the way it should work is that we would get from each institution their holdings. So we understand what they have subscriptions to. And so as a user finds an article, in this case, we're looking at this integrative organismal biology from Wiley. So if you didn't have that as part of your subscriptions, you will have a button that says find through Interlibrary Loan. If you did have a subscription to that, there will be a button, find in my library, and you can click straight into your link resolver and then straight through that to the text as you would with a traditional search tool. We now also have government documents. So for some government documents, we actually host those ourselves because some of the sites are maybe not necessarily totally robust, and we don't want the user to have an experience where they try and access a document and there's an issue with the site. So the government documents might be hosted directly on the Yewno site, but those are the main options for access. So the answer is no, you don't have to leave the site, but you'll click straight through to either the library resources or Interlibrary Loan.
And that's a piece that we have not been able personally to implement yet, because we're not using a link resolver. So you can see here, because this is an item, a government document that is hosted by Yewno, I am able to go directly to it. We are hoping to change what we use for our security certificate materials over the summer, and then our students would be able to go directly into the product. So that's a challenge we've faced on our end that is not on Yewno's end, that we are working to resolve.
Now, I don't have any other open questions online, but if anybody would like to email in, do feel free. If people think of questions after the call, please feel free to email us, and we can liaise with Liz to get you the answer or connect you. And we will also be, as I mentioned, we're recording this, we'll also be sending everybody who registered a copy of the recording. So as we don't have anything else at this time, I'd like to say, first of all, a huge thank you to Liz for joining the call and for answering all of the questions. That's been fantastic. Thank you very much, Liz.
You're very welcome.
And thank you also to everybody who's joined the call today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.